Well, another season of The Simpsons has come and gone. Let's do this. Alright, Internet. So, a few months back, I did a video where I watched the best episode of every season of The Simpsons to sort of try to understand the path the show has taken over the years. And in that video, I didn't cover season 33 because it was still ongoing. Well, I guess it's time to talk about it. So we're not going to go over every episode, despite the fact that I did waste my time watching all of it, because most of them just aren't worth talking about. Honestly, half the season can and will be summed up in the sentence I'm about to say once I finish saying this one. This episode isn't good or bad, really. It just feels kind of flat, like it needs another draft or two to punch up the jokes and tighten the plot up a little. So yeah, that honestly covers my opinion on literally half the episodes from this season, you know? And now that we've got that out of the way, we can talk about the stuff that I actually think is worth talking about. Also, I'm kind of grading this season on a curve. None of this stands up to an episode like Mr. Plow or anything else from the Golden Age. I'm grading it on new Simpsons, as it should be. We're going to break the episodes I'm talking about into 3 sections: the good, the bad, and the weird. The weird being a blanket term for episodes that I think are worth talking about, but don't fall into those 2 general categories. Okay, so that's enough setup. We're going to get into it now, and we're going to start talking about the 2-parter, A Serious Flanders, really surprised me. Mainly because it's a parody of the television series Fargo, and I was honestly expecting it to just be kind of cringe. I was pleasantly surprised that it was actually good. The jokes mostly land, but more importantly, I really like the way that they replicated the tone and feel of Fargo, while still keeping in with the Simpsons feel. It really does feel like a middle ground between the two. It's not just redoing Fargo, but casting their characters in it. It felt like they were telling a Fargo-style Simpsons story. The 20th episode, Marge the Meanie, is the closest thing we have to classic Simpsons in this season. While I had said a lot of episodes were a draft or 2 away from being good, this is a draft or 2 away from being fantastic, in my opinion. The way they told a story with some real emotional depth and some very solid jokes felt like the Simpsons I know and love, but just a little bit off. There are a few Marge-centric episodes in this season, and none of them hold a candle to this one, and the fact that they also managed to deepen her relationship with Bart is fantastic. And that's kind of it. While I did enjoy some stuff that we're going to touch on later, these are the only episodes that I would really call good. Really sad that there's only 2 or 3 of them, really. Now on to the bad. Let's be honest. This is what you tuned in for. Starting right off the bat, the first episode, Star of the Backstage, is a mess of an episode. It's a musical, but Kristen Bell is doing the singing for Julie Kavner for some reason. And that could have been done in a good way, or at least not as bad a way, but with the other characters doing their own singing, it really sticks out like a sore thumb, even trying to explain it. Not only that, but the show's floating timeline is really obvious here. Setting their high school play during Y2K really sticks out like a sore thumb. And on top of that, the episode is just bad. The jokes don't land, and I think there was only one song that I thought was mildly good at best, and Marge's arc just fell flat. It's a real letdown because I've always viewed her as a character with so much potential. Now, all that being said, as bad as this episode was, I don't think it was as bad as episode 9. Mothers and Other Strangers is an episode that retcons the original episode where Homer finds out his mother is alive, and does it for the worse. The trip Homer and Abe go on is nowhere near as emotionally resonant as what goes on in the original episode, and it adds no depth to the story, and that's like the one thing a retcon should do. With these 2 episodes in specific, you get a good example of how The Simpsons running this long is bad, and doing so messes with some of the fundamentals of what makes The Simpsons great. They're just messing with their own canon for the sake of it, and it's not worth it. But this isn't an episode about the disrespect to the canon, so we're gonna move on. Okay, so I really want to get the name of this episode right. You won't believe what this episode is about. Act 3 will shock you. Lives up to its name. The episode is, for some reason, both about cancel culture and a parody of the Suicide Squad, and has Kumail Nanjiani in it. And he's not given any good jokes either. He's more of a plot device than anything else. It's really a waste of his talent. The one good thing I will say about the episode is that they reframed Helen Lovejoy into a Karen for the sake of talking about cancel culture. And I think that's a real good fit for the character and is an interesting way to reinterpret her for the modern era. Sadly, they only have one joke for her, which is her calling the police at every instance of anything going on, so it gets old pretty quick. Yeah, all these episodes were honestly really bad. Some of the worst Simpsons I've seen, so let's just move past this into the next section. The fourth episode, The Ways We Were, is such a mixed bag. I like the fact that they brought back one of Moe's old love interests to be his new love interest, both because it brings back a character who had potential, and also I like the fact that they're telling a story now where, they are in love and they're doing well, but they didn't work the first time, because sometimes that happens in real life. And more often than not, media portrays couples as either being good for each other or bad for each other. So this nuance is nice. The story overall works well, though there's a musical number in it that I don't think works. But that's not the only problem. The rest of the episode is completely unmemorable. Seriously, I had to look up what the plot was and how it's about Waze transferring all of the traffic onto the Simpsons street to remember that's what it was about. And it's as uninteresting as I just made it sound. But overall, I really appreciated the fact that they were able to tell an interesting story about how Moe, despite getting in his own way, was able to find love. Lisa's Belly, the fifth episode, was almost the best one of the season. The way they portrayed how words, despite how innocuous they may have been said, can seep into your mind, I thought was really poignant, both in the way that they animated it. I thought that was really interesting, but also the way that is real, and that is how insecurities develop. They do great work with how Lisa is lashing out and how Marge, despite trying her best and multiple times, still gets defensive, not understanding quite what she's done. It's all really interesting. I thought that there was so much depth to this story until the way they ended it. It resolves with Lisa and Marge going to a hypnotherapist who allows them to jointly go into Lisa's mind to see the damage Marge's words have done. And then they go into Marge's mind to see a similar event occurring in her childhood, so that way they can better relate to each other about this. It just felt to me like a really cheap way to end the storyline. They did it in maybe 5 minutes tops, and I feel like it cheapens everything they did before that. I found it muddy the message that the rest of the episode before that was depicting perfectly. The Bart B plot was also weak and not really in character for him, but I don't think it was as big a deal and isn't as episode ruining as that ending is. Episode 12 confused me. Pixelated and Afraid is a story about Homer and Marge being stranded in the wilderness and having to survive, and it makes some interesting choices. First and foremost being the fact that they learned how to successfully survive by watching reality TV about it. They even subvert expectations in an interesting way. While they're there, they really bond in a nice way, and they start really loving the way their relationship is trapped out in the wild. Then there's a moment where Homer sees someone who can help rescue them and hesitates before calling them, and they end up leaving before he gets a chance to. You'd think that would be how they set up a big conflict between him and Marge in the third act, but it's not. She understands why he had that hesitation, and they're still able to use the tracks left by the ranger to find their way back to civilization. I think the fact that they did that was really cool. The part that seemed really strange to me was the setup. They decide to go on this romantic couples trip because Lisa, after watching a bunch of old romantic black and white movies, thinks that their relationship is stale and needs to be saved. But the life and routine they have in this episode isn't bad. They're having a great time watching cheesy reality TV together, and when they're doing chores around the house, they're really working in tandem fantastically. Is it grand, sweeping romance? No. Is it a really good routine for a couple who have 3 kids? Absolutely. It's the healthiest and most well-balanced their relationship and dynamic has been in a long time, and is better than most relationships you see on TV in comedies, except for like Bob and Linda, because they are the best. It's a decent episode built on a bad foundation. Oh, and the way they censor shirtless Homer for way too long at the beginning of the episode isn't as good a joke as I think they thought it was. It felt very cheap and very season 24. This is like the 5th plane. The sound of bleeding gums really upset me. The episode follows Lisa, who's mad because Bleeding Gums music is being used in ads for the lottery, despite the fact that he hated gambling. This is really frustrating to me because of the fact that The Simpsons is now owned by Disney. Just recently, it was announced that Marvel had gotten the 20-year rights to Stan Lee's image to use in essentially whatever they want, and that feels like a very similar thing here. On top of that, there was a recent statement from Kathleen Kennedy about Star Wars, saying that the big thing that they had learned from Solo was that you can't recast legacy characters. And that's something that really lends to the fact that people think that over the next few years, we're going to start seeing de-aged digital versions of actors in their movies, so that way they can keep using their characters after the actors have retired or passed away. And yeah, she did walk back those statements later, but it's very clear that that is their long-term plans, whether they're saying it is or not. And no shade on Kathleen Kennedy personally. This isn't her decision. This isn't, her being bad for Star Wars. She is one person working at a huge company that is clearly making these decisions. So don't be blaming her, be blaming Disney, because they are the people who are doing these terrible things, not an individual. So having The Simpsons, who are owned by the same company, making very obvious jokes saying that that's bad, but also the episode kind of ends with you kind of have to accept it, feels really cheap to me. And it feels very different than how they used to make fun of Fox News all the time, despite being owned by Fox. It's different because it really does have a bit of a, well, it still turned out well in the end, even though this gross thing is happening, and I really didn't like that. It did not sit well with me at all. It just felt disingenuous and dirty. Episode 18, on the other hand, was just odd to me. The Bart storyline with the new teacher wasn't bad, I just feel like they focused on it way too much. It started off feeling like a B-plot, but then it slowly took over the episode, and I don't think there was enough material for it. It really would have worked better if it just stayed as the secondary thing they were doing with the episode. Meanwhile, Lisa's story felt really rushed. While in general, I think that her line to get an award isn't the greatest storyline for her, I think this episode really had potential. I like that it was tied into her taking care of an animal, and they really could have done something about the morality of all of this weighing down on her, but they don't. What could have been a story where she's feeling really guilty instead just becomes a few gags about her trying to hide the octopus. It could have been an episode with a real learning experience for a character, but instead it didn't feel like much because their focus was in the wrong place. So those are the episodes that I thought were worth talking about, but I want to bring up something else that I noticed throughout the season. Something strange. Something evil. No, not evil, just a little odd. It's not even odd, it's just something I noticed. There are 3 or 4 episodes in this season alone where the Simpsons are very specifically eating tacos for dinner. And it's not just something they animate, it is something that is narratively part of the scene. I've never actively noticed them having something like that before, and I don't understand why they would just keep doing that over and over. Like there so many instant payoff for it in the narrative. Is something else going on? What's happening? So I was actually going to do a whole bit in this section. I was going to use my corkboard to make a conspiracy thing with like string and whatnot, and I was going to have like a shirt and tie like Charlie in that one It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia meme, but my back hurts, so I'm not gonna do that. Moving on. This season also had a lot of musical numbers in it. Both the first and last episode of the season were full-on musical episodes, but there were also multiple individual songs in episodes. That said, the only one that I really felt worked was the one in Lisa's Belly, where Patty and Selma sing a little song about being okay with your body no matter what it's like. It's not a great musical number per se, and I don't think it gives its message as well as it could have, but I do think it was a well-utilized way to montage a good chunk of storytelling into one moment, and that's the only time I thought the musical numbers worked in the season. Nothing, and I mean nothing this season, comes up anywhere close to anything even remotely similar to the Monorail song, for example. So overall, this season wasn't bad. A lot of generic episodes, but only 3 I would call bad episodes of television. It's not a season that I would wholeheartedly suggest you go check out if you haven't seen it, but I do think that if you are the kind of person who, while you're cooking or doing chores, like to have the TV on in the background, I think this season's good for that. There's some good jokes that you can pick up while you're doing things, but it's not something you really need to focus on. So I guess that's what The Simpsons is now? And you could just do that with the old episodes that you love instead. Also, if you like the sax Simpsons music that I used in this video, which of course you did, you should check out my friend David. He made it for me. Hell of a guy. He does music stuff on his own channel. I'll put the link to that in the description to this video next to the socials I never ask you to check out, like my Twitter and my Instagram and that. So that'll all be in the description. And that is it for this one. Leave your comments on what you thought about the video or the episodes themselves in the comments below. Likes, subscribes, check out my other videos, all that's fun. Really helps me out. So yeah, have a good one, and until next time,